conversations on equity and belonging in the curriculum. And so I am so thrilled uh, to have our guest today. I'm thrilled and honored, I should say, to have Dr. Joyce King here today. And first, I have to kind of start with a little preface because um, Dr. King's work has been one of the few works that I felt really supported what I did. In
Oh,
my work, I do have your two books, and there are some parts of your work that I tend to cite frequently and talk about frequently. Um, I could tell you more about that as we talk.
well, I'm happy to know that.
Yeah, and so even I didn't tell you even the last talk I did. I actually posted a past talk, and you get to
Mhm.
see parts of where I quoted you in that past talk that I posted.
Oh, how wonderful.
Um,
I appreciate that so much. Well, I'm an
thank
admirer
you.
of your work. And so, the cultural connection in education have often focused on history or literature.
Hmm.
And so for someone to bring out culture and science was
Hmm.
groundbreaking. And I really want to commend you for
Thank you.
going to the root.
Thank you. It was a hard route, but I'll I want to really thank you for being here, and I'm so excited to, get to know more about you and your work. And
Mhm.
I have seen, I know you had shared a podcast and with me, and I really want to use this opportunity to delve into and have some, conversations. I think every time I listen to you, and even the last time I remember you came to give a talk, um, I do remember some of what you said,
Mhm.
and that was years ago. So I'm excited.
Yeah.
Um, so why don't we start by you introducing yourself to the audience, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, my name is Joyce Elaine King, and I'm currently a professor at Georgia State University. I hold the Benjamin E. Mays Endowed Chair for Urban Teaching, Learning, and Leadership. That's a mouthful. That's how they put it together. And I've been at Georgia State since 2004. I
Okay.
came to Atlanta to serve as provost at Spelman College, and I was there for a couple of years
Oh.
and also on the faculty there. I came to Atlanta from New York, where I had worked at Medgar Evers College as
Mhm.
associate provost. Before that, I was in the administration at University of New Orleans as
Mhm.
a associate vice chancellor. I was doing administration for about 10 years
Okay.
after leaving my teaching position at Santa Clara University, where I was director of teacher education
Mhm.
for 12 years. Prior to that, I was a visiting professor at Stanford. Before that, I was the founding director of ethnic studies at Mills College
Mhm.
in California. So I've been in the business for
Mhm.
about 50 years. I taught my first sociology class. My background is sociology and Black studies. I taught my first sociology
Mhm.
class as an undergraduate.
Mhm.
Um, I was a student activist and helped to establish the program in African American Studies at Stanford. And at
Mhm.
the same time, I was based in the community of East Palo Alto, and I taught a sociology class at Nairobi College in East
Oh.
Palo Alto. East Palo Alto was very unique in that the education innovations and really revolution that were going on then in the 60s, including establishing Nairobi College, which was a private system of education for Black people from
Mhm.
preschool all the way up to community college. So I had that
Mhm.
kind of exposure to um, transforming education, and I would say education for liberation.
Wow.
I'm from California. I grew up in the Valley from
Mhm.
Stockton, and I went to Stanford as an undergraduate freshman in 1965.
Wow.
My family had migrated to California from Louisiana, Oklahoma, Arkansas, that sort of, story of how we moved from one place to the other, but my
Mhm.
mother's people came to California in the 1930s before World War II,
Mhm.
uh, and, then I grew up in Stockton and had the good fortune to be mentored by Black teachers,
Mm.
and that's how I got to Stanford. One of my community teacher mentors had been a student at Stanford. She graduated from Stanford in 1965,
Mhm.
Mrs. Leonard, McCarty Leonard, and she was from the Bay Area. She and her husband came to Stockton as Black teachers, and
Mhm.
they looked out for Black children, and I ended up going to Stanford on a scholarship.
Wow.
So that's some of my story.
Awesome. I do have to say I am fascinated by your journey, especially, having heard a little bit about it. Um, and I was wondering, can you tell us about your journey that led to the work you're doing now, and that led to the way you think about your work? Um, what led you here?
Well, I have to remind people that the 60s was a
Mhm.
very particular historical period, and so there
Mhm.
was a movement.
Mhm.
Um, when I arrived at Stanford in 1965, that's like the civil rights movement, lots of things
Mm.
going on. And so students felt the need to advocate not only for ourselves, but for others. And we were
Mm.
very much identified with the Black community. My class of 1965 had the largest number of Black students that Stanford had ever admitted. We were 25.
Mm.
The ones before me, they had maybe 4 or 3 Black students in their classes.
Mhm.
I came from a community where people had known my mother growing up, which is kind of unusual in California. You think about, all these people coming from different places.
Right.
I was very rooted in a
Mhm.
community. People knew me, they knew my family.
Mhm.
The church was very important. So
Mhm.
when I went to Stanford, my mother took me first to the community of East Menlo Park to
Mm.
meet with a pastor
Mhm.
who was in our church fellowship. And she said to the pastor, I'm bringing my daughter here because she's going to go to Stanford on the other side of town, but I
Mhm.
want her to know where our people are.
Mhm.
So that was
Mm.
my entree to
Mhm.
higher education through my own community.
Wow.
Um, I was the
Mm.
first generation college. I was the first one to graduate from
Mhm.
high school. I had an older brother who had gotten into the prison industrial complex.
Mm.
I grew up with 25 cousins. And so
Mm.
I had
Mhm.
I had a sense of belonging to people.
Mhm.
But at Stanford at that time, the whole idea of assimilation and we're bringing you here so that you can sort of become something else and escape or whatever. I didn't have that. Wasn't my story.
Mhm.
And so I remember something happened that was very, very significant. My grandmother called
Mhm.
one day, and I was in my dorm with my 2 roommates. One of them was a white girl from Texas who
Mhm.
said she'd never been around Black people before.
Mhm.
The other one was actually Native American, and her family, her father was on the faculty, but she didn't look Native American. She was a
Mhm.
blonde girl.
Mhm.
And, my grandmother called, and I was talking to my grandmother on the phone, and that back in the day, they had a phone on the wall, like
Yeah.
that old phone that you have in the kitchen. So you didn't have any privacy, and my 2
Right.
roommates were sitting there, and when I hung up after talking to my grandmother, they looked at me so strangely, and they said, "Couldn't understand a thing you said."
Wow.
And I laughed switched back to moi? What? You know? So I that was my awareness that I had
Mhm.
come into a space
Mhm.
that I could fit into, but
Mhm.
would it mean that when I left, I would no longer be able to talk to my grandmother? And so I was
Mm.
very conscious of this process of becoming, assimilating,
Mhm.
adapting,
Mm.
accepting. And that was part of our critique of the curriculum. You know, there wasn't
Mm.
anything there that affirmed who we were,
Mhm.
didn't tell our stories. And so out of that period, you get Black students, you know, making demands on the institution to change. And that's what we
Mhm.
did.
Wow.
So my sense of who I am and what I do
Mhm.
stems from the value that I held then for the
Mhm.
knowledge in my community. And I never was feeling like I had to get away from who I was.
Mm.
So I learned the word epistemology that, you
Mm.
know, there are ways in which some people's knowledge is valued and other people's knowledge is not acknowledged or even
Mhm.
erased.
Yeah.
I had the experience of everything that I was being taught was
Mhm.
erasing who I was and where I came from, and so
Mm.
I resisted.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I have like 1,000 questions here. You know, let me hone in on something you said. I know that even today, and even, pretty long after, still have people today who actually believe that what it is they have to offer, in terms of knowledge, is better. And I'm not just, honing in on just people who are white. I'm even thinking about, some of us. Um, but, and so, what is it have you've observed, and you've studied within communities as well, that really helped you to see, um, how our ways of knowing is not only different, but important for us? What would you say to those people in terms of, based on what you've learned?
Well, I've had to say it over and
Mhm.
over again
Mhm.
to preserve my own sanity and identity. But, you know, you're a learner. You're trying to learn
Mhm.
what will be helpful to you. So I came into a place where I thought there was going to be some tools for
Mhm.
me to use to solve problems that were needed in the community. So when I was an undergraduate, I was a sociology major. I was
Mhm.
volunteering at the local high school. Kids couldn't read, you know, real problems. And I go to the department chair to ask him for assistance to make my education more relevant.
Mhm.
And I was explaining some of the issues that I was dealing with. I said, I'm a sociology major because I thought sociology was about solving social problems. And so he asked me, he
Mm.
said, well, do you ever work crossword puzzles? I said, you know, I'm here talking to you about kids carrying guns and life and death issues, and you asking me about crossword puzzles? He said, yes, because I don't think you have the intellectual capacity to do sociology. I think you should go down the road and study social work at San Jose State.
Mhm. Mm. Wow.
So I graduated
Mm.
with a BA in sociology with honors from that same
Wow.
and did work that I thought was relevant to the problems and the issues that I was concerned about. But,
Mhm.
you know, it's a worldview. So you have
Mhm.
people who have accepted that worldview.
Yeah.
Many of my professors were Jewish, and so they had assimilated. They
Mhm.
considered themselves white, and they would say to me, why did a professor say to me, well, we want you to do it the way we did it. Well, you all have erased yourselves, and I'm not here about erasure, you know,
Mhm.
but there's a movement. It's not just me. There's a
Mhm.
movement, and you can see other people raising the same concerns. So you got black students all over the country raising these issues. You've got,
Mhm.
the movement at San Francisco State
Mhm.
calling for black studies and ethnic studies. So that movement, that context
Mhm.
opens up choices that you
Wow.
might not have had 5 years before.
Mhm. Wow.
I'll give you one more example of
Sure.
something that was really affirming for me.
Mhm.
Now I'm a senior, I'm taking a theory class,
Mhm.
and I'm the only black student in the class. And the class is about what the sociologists call achievement motivation. And the
Mhm.
professor has written a book about how different groups of people have different levels of achievement motivation,
Mhm.
motivation to achieve. That's his theory. So
Mhm.
he's explaining to us why Native Americans are poor and living on reservations because they don't have any motivation to achieve. And the evidence that he cited was in folk tales. And he said,
Mm.
you can look at Native American folk tales and you can see the proof that they don't have any motivation to achieve. Look at Coyote,
Mm.
the character. He never wants to work. There you have the proof. And so our assignment was to use his theory and his quantitative measure
Mhm.
of achievement motivation to show that we had, observed this lesson.
Mhm.
So I was really incensed about, again, what you're trying to get me to believe. So
Mhm.
I go to my community library and I get African American folk tales
Mhm.
and European nursery rhymes.
Mhm.
And I use the quantitative formula that he had given us to
Mhm.
score African American folk tales and European nursery rhymes. So
Mhm.
Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after, and the score is 0. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, etc., etc. Score 0. So I
Mhm.
scored all the European tales. Then I got the African American folk tales. And so we talking about tricksters? Well, let's look at Brer Rabbit. Brer Rabbit was always bothering Brer Fox. So one day he tripped. Brer Fox got him and he said, I'm going to put you in the pot and cook you tonight. So Brer Rabbit, being as smart and clever as he was, said, "Oh, Brother Fox, please, you can put me in the pot. Just don't throw me over the fence to the briar patch." Fox said, "What?" So he threw the rabbit over the fence, and the rabbit is jumping up and down. He said, "I'm home, I'm home." Score 10. So I scored all the African American tales, all the European nursery rhymes, wrote it up, turned in my paper, and I got an A because I used this formula
Mhm.
talking about achievement motivation.
Talking
7
about
years later,
mhm.
talking about achievement motivation.
Was okay,
7
yeah.
years later,
Mhm.
when I'm a professor at Santa Clara University, and the graduate student TA who was in that class is also a faculty member, and we were at a faculty party. This is 7 years later. And
Mhm.
she asked me, she said, Joyce, do you remember that paper you wrote for Professor so and so about achievement motivation? I said, yeah, I remember. I got an A. She said, we always wondered if that was your own work.
Wow.
So now, if I'm thinking from my own perspective in the
Mhm.
interest of my own people and other people that this system has denigrated,
Mhm.
and you all are sitting there talking, wondering if I'm cheating because I'm
Mhm.
not thinking the way you're thinking. So
Yeah.
you see, it's not just trying to convince somebody.
Right.
It is recognizing how this framework affects them and
Right.
how then they affect us.
Mhm.
So I had many examples in my own educational experience that reminded me that we're not on the same page, and we have
Mhm.
to be able to think for ourselves and use the knowledge that we're getting for the benefit of people.
Mhm. Um, wait, I'm not hearing you. Da, 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 da. Oh,
Um, it's okay now?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry. I keep forgetting there's a
Uh-huh.
delay in the YouTube and that you're not talking now.
Oh,
I was like, wait a second. I
okay.
was just looking to make sure it's on. Wow. Okay. Wow. You know, let me say something that I haven't said, honestly. One of
Mhm,
the big reasons that I find myself drawn to being at HBCUs are those rich
mhm,
conversations I have with students in the classroom, and having to present to students and to other faculty's classes in historically white universities. I get to see the stark difference, even in our the way we come to know, and being in our situation where things are constantly unpredictable, where we're at the mercy of people's
mhm,
emotions and feelings and thoughts. um, I don't think people realize how much thinking we have to do and how much thinking we have to practice, sometimes even to
mhm,
anticipate what may come next as a survival mechanisms.
mhm,
We're constantly making
oh,
hypotheses,
sure.
predictions.
Mhm,
And so those conversations you have with those students in the classrooms are so amazingly rich that you learn so much from understanding the way we think about things and why, right? And when life has been a
mhm,
lull where it keeps coming to you, you can just sit there and sometimes just, I don't know, not have to engage in that level of thinking that we often have to. Um,
mhm. I understand what you're saying. Yes, well, I've worked in HBCUs. I've worked in predominantly white elite universities, and
mhm,
I would say that in every context, there is this process of being for yourself and for your community, or as Malcolm said, getting 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 the okey doke put on you where you're not really able to see things clearly.
mhm. Wow. I'm I'm so curious also, when it comes to your scholarship, seeing where you've come to some of your conclusions, which I was, fascinated by, some of your conclusions. And the one that I frequently look at had to do with the importance, and I believe that's your book on heritage knowledge in the curriculum, the ability of
Mhm,
cultures to have their individual voice and what that means.
mhm,
um I'm wondering, can you speak to that a little bit, because I think that even today when we think about what's going on, and what um the approach, you know I realize the approach to even having us um be able to use our own voice, so much of it is dependent on the economic pipeline, right? And so much of it is influenced by that. Can you speak a little bit about what's your journey been like, and your thinking, over time of your scholarship and how you've approached it, the type of questions you asked over time, and the type of evidence you sought over time, and why? Um, how has that emerged?
well, when I was an undergraduate
Mm-hmm.
at Stanford, taking a Western Civ course for a whole year
Mm-hmm.
and not learning anything about my own presence as an African ascendant person in this
Mm-hmm.
course. You
Yeah.
don't know at the time what's happening. You
Mm-hmm.
just feel ill at ease.
Mm-hmm.
Then I went and I was in Europe. I was a student study abroad in
Mhm.
Italy. I spoke Italian, I could relate to them,
Mhm.
and I'm in a library in Florence, downtown,
Mhm.
reading for the first time about the Harlem Renaissance. I didn't know
Mm.
about the Harlem Renaissance.
Wow.
I hadn't learned about it in school.
Mhm.
I'm a sophomore going up to a junior, and I'm reading about the Harlem Renaissance in Italian in
And in
Italy.
Italy. Yeah.
And then I come back to the US, and the Black Studies movement is bursting out.
Mhm.
So in my own lived experience, I know why there's a need for what the
Mhm.
students are asking for. So the questions we're asking, they're not like just pulled out of air. They come out of history. Now I have classes with somebody like Sinclair Drake, who's
Mm.
introducing me
Mm.
a Black perspective on knowledge and
Mm.
on history. And I'm
Mm.
learning about the world in a way that has been omitted from my
Mm.
education.
Yeah.
So that alerts me
Yeah.
that there are other questions to be asked. But the
Mhm.
questions come from
Mhm.
trying to be relevant to what the people need.
Mhm.
Now, fast
Mhm.
forward, I'm a professor of teacher education, and the discourse or the framing of education is now multicultural education, diversity, and for the first time, we're actually talking about cultural knowledge. We're
Mhm.
saying that
Mhm.
educators need cultural knowledge to meet the needs of the diverse students that they're going to be educating. It's very
Mhm.
different from the
Mhm.
way I had experienced education, where the professors were telling us that there was something wrong with our culture.
Mm.
There was particularly something
Mm.
wrong with Black mothers, the same way that my professor had said that Native Americans were responsible for their own impoverishment. Now we're hearing that it's Black mothers that don't talk to their children right, and that's why they're not ready for school. They don't read them books at night, and
Mm.
all this is our fault.
Mm. Mm.
So now we're saying, okay, well, but the teachers need cultural knowledge. This is a big transformation from that deficit thinking.
Mhm. Yeah.
But it occurred to me one day, following the work of Dr. John Henrik Clark,
Mhm.
who had written about what he called heritage teaching.
Mhm.
And heritage teaching allows any group to place themselves, as he said, on the map of human geography. We
Mhm.
all have a place of being in
Mhm.
humanity. So it occurred to me, well, if you're going to have heritage teaching, you're going to need some heritage knowledge. So the cultural knowledge is what teachers need,
Mhm.
but the heritage knowledge is what we bring from our own heritage, legacy, and lived
Mm.
reality. And so that's why I introduced the conceptualization of heritage knowledge. So
Mm.
that's the way knowledge transforms and th- things grow through time.
Mhm.
The Harlem Renaissance didn't come from nowhere.
Mhm.
There were people thinking these thoughts in the 1800s, before
Mhm.
1924 in Harlem. So we're
Mhm.
building on a legacy that we learn about when we are educated properly within our own framework. But most of the
Mhm.
time we're not. And so we don't know the history and the lineage.
Wow. Um, can you go in a little bit into just give us a gist of what is the Harlem Renaissance?
Oh, well, that was in 1920s Harlem.
Mhm.
We've just celebrated. We've been acknowledging that Dr. Carter G. Woodson established Negro History Week in 1926. This is now
Mhm.
100 years. Negro History Week was transformed and became Black History Month.
Mhm.
So the progressive era of the 1920s brought forth new ideas. On the white side, you had John Dewey. In other words, the educational philosophy changed over time. And in
Mhm.
Harlem, our poets, our writers, our creative
Mhm.
community produced a sort of revolutionary approach to valuing our knowledge and creative expression. So you had plays, you had Langston Hughes with his poetry,
Mhm.
um, our writers producing new materials from our perspective.
Mhm.
And that
Mm.
was part of what has become known as the Harlem Renaissance. There are many names that we can cite
Mhm.
that have been celebrated for their originality
Mhm.
and what they produced, reflecting the culture and the perspectives of our people.
Wow. Wow. Oh my gosh. Which question do I
Zora
ask
Neale
you?
Hurston
Yep.
wrote using African American, quote
Mhm.
unquote, dialect. But these are our classics.
Mhm.
This is our transformation of knowledge at that point. And it happens over and over again. We
Yeah.
celebrate the Harlem Renaissance, but that's not the only Renaissance that we've experienced as a people. You can take it all the way back to ancient Kemet, the
Mhm.
Renaissance of what was produced in those ancient times.
Mhm. Wow. Oh my goodness. Um, Trying to figure out which question I ask you here. I have like a thousand things in my head. I,
Let me ask you a question.
okay,
Let me ask you a question.
sure.
Um, what was your experience growing up, and the people that were around you that you would say led you to recognize that the Gullah community had scientific knowledge? What happened to you?
Wow. Wow, I could talk about that for a long time, but the gist of it is, um, so I grew up really close to my grandmom. We lived at home with my mom, grandma, and my grandparents. Um, and I think because I grew up, well, I was born here, and I grew up, lived my early years in Guyana, and so growing up, I had cousins around me. It had to do with just, like you said, embracing the level of community. I always had cousins, I always had family. Um, I think it was taking the leap coming over here, um, and applying for college. I went through some crises. Crises in adjusting, like you said, and adjusting and assimilating, like you said, trying to erase yourself in some ways. Having my background be redefined. How I identify myself there was different from how, you know, I was put in this box. And literally you have check boxes, right? We just never checked off boxes before. you know,
Mhm.
and working so hard to assimilate, dealing with, I think, just going through, in hindsight, realizing how ashamed I was to be me,
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
depths of that shame, right? That, you I also, and then when I went to teachers college, I remember the first class I took was the history of science education, the history of ideas in science ed, a book I had to read. And then I kept thinking, where are the African Americans and what were they doing at the time? And I was just trying to figure out what's going on here. I knew they existed. It's not mentioned here because you're always seeking yourself, right? You're taking
Mhm.
classes. A white
Mhm.
person is able to see themselves as they're reading. They don't
Mhm.
realize they're seeing themselves because it's all about them. But then you, as a black person with these books, you're trying to figure out, well, what does this have to do with me? Right? That's your journey because And the thing is, we're always reminded, and we're on. For me, we're always reminded that it's not our journey because people make sure they let you know that's not your journey. That's not supposed to be your journey, right? And so it led me
Yeah.
in the archives. And this is me just taking a non-matriculated course, by the way. I just kind of happened to this take this course because my at the time my husband was in school, and I was like, okay, so you're in school, I'll just take a course. And so led me into the archives because I was like, where were the black people, and what's happening during that time, the 1860s, whatever. And so I stumbled upon, oh my gosh, I stumbled upon, oh my goodness, what's her name? My mind is blank right now. Oh, I should know this. I stumbled upon her. I talk about her all the time, but for some reason I'm drawing a blank. I stumbled upon her
Mhm.
because in the 1860s, because she was one of the few black women, and I'm guessing she was probably mixed too, who was given the opportunities
Mhm.
to learn a little bit botany, um, attend some of these talks. Um,
Mhm.
and so I started trying to figure out how do I abstract from her experiences to figure out the science, because mixed in there was all the stuff about slavery, right? It was all the stuff that she was
Mhm.
fighting. She was fighting for black people in the middle of that. And so it led me down a journey of trying to figure out what was happening. Like if I were to understand the science, what was happening, it led me to think places like Charles Drew. And I got his
Mhm.
dissertation. I was
Mhm.
trying to abstract the science. And by the way, and I did notice you had a chapter in Charles Drew in your book too. And so I don't know if you know, I had
Mhm.
created a curriculum, related to Charles Drew and looking at his science
Wow.
and
Mhm.
you know and how it relates to the biology I teach, and looking at diffusion, and because I taught biology
So
for 16 years.
self-discovery,
What's that?
it's self-defense, it's
Mm-hmm.
self-discovery, self-defense, and self-determination.
Yep.
So either you're gonna be a human being and be fully, in your own agency, or you will allow this system to make you disappear and you become a tool for how that's gonna affect other people.
Yeah.
And that's our humanity. We choose to be on the side of fully being human. And
Yes.
like you say, it's a journey. Then you start looking, and then you get more affirmation, and along the way, you have some resistance, but you keep choosing over and over again not to be erased.
Mm. Wow. Oh
For
my
your
goodness.
grandmother.
Yes. Absolutely. Constantly go back to her and remembering, fondest things about her. Um, during the pandemic, one of the things we learned, because her family did a little WhatsApp, I did not notice about her, but it makes sense in hindsight. When she got married, she refused to let people straighten her hair. She refused to have her hair straightened for her wedding. She couldn't figure out why. And I remember she always had these beautiful curls. And as a little girl, I used to remember I would just put my hand in her hair and was playing with her fine curls. And it's something that sticks with me to this day. Um,
Mhm.
the determination she had to not diminish herself because of other
Yeah.
people's perception. And
Mhm.
and it keeps bringing me back to even what Charles Drew, said, talking about you're building brick by brick, and the type of bricks we have to build, really
Mhm.
has to do with building our humanity. We're still building our humanity, right?
Yeah. Yes. Mhm. So I'm
Um,
glad to know about your grandmother. And
thank you.
her hair.
Absolutely. It's amazing. I discovered after writing my children's series books. It's something we a lot of us have in common, right? People will tell me, "Oh yeah, I had that experience," because I feature
Mhm,
grandmothers in those books as well. Um,
mhm.
because it's what we do. We don't get sent to babysitter; we get sent to our grandmothers, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Um.
Well, I had a babysitter who was from Jamaica. So
Mm,
if you can imagine, I was maybe 4, and my
mhm.
mother chose this lady in the community to look after me.
Mhm.
I only remember that she was a little strange.
Mhm.
She smoked a pipe. She lived in a trailer, and she spoke differently. She
Mhm.
didn't call me Joyce, she
Mhm.
called me Jice. And so now fast forward again, I'm
Mhm.
at Stanford University, going to attend a lecture by a young man who became very, very important for his study of Marcus Garvey,
Mm.
Robert Hill. Well, Bobby
Mm.
was then a graduate student, and we were walking across campus, and he said to me, "Oh, in Jamaica, we would call you Jice." Ding, 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 ding. All kind of bells are ringing because now I
Mhm.
understand that my babysitter must have been from Jamaica. Well, what is this lady doing in the 1950s in California from Jamaica? But
Mhm.
she's the person my mother chose to look after me.
Mhm.
And so from a very young age, I had experiences with other Black people,
Mhm.
with other experiences, which
Mhm.
later on as you grow, these experiences make more sense to you. So
Absolutely.
I had a babysitter who called me Jice. She smoked a pipe and she was a little different. And I
Mhm.
remember asking my mother, why do you call her Miss Lorraine? And my mother explained to me, now I'm 4 years old, and I
Mhm.
understand my mother is calling her Miss. My mother said because of her white hair, because
Mm.
she's an elder. So
Huh.
these lessons we bring from our elders, from our ancestors, and we
Mhm.
understand that we are our ancestors. They are
Yes.
living through us.
Mhm. Absolutely. Wow. Um, my goodness. I'm so curious. It's funny. I'm holding back and asking some questions, and I realize I should just go for it. I'm so curious
Yeah.
as to in your journey in figuring this out, and even in terms of your research. Um, I wonder where shame comes in, I guess, just to put it bluntly, because I know that it's something we've constantly have to deal with, to the point where, I mean, I was so tempted to write my whole book on that instead of just doing one talk or one chapter. What have you come across about that?
I, I never experienced anything like shame. Um,
Mm,
we were poor.
mm-hmm.
I could say we were impoverished. We lived in a part of town with other poor people,
Mm-hmm.
but we were rich in our relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, um, I went to work in the fields
Mm-hmm.
with my grandmother. My grandmother didn't have formal education,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the first chapters I wrote about, let's say, multicultural education,
Mm-hmm.
I talked about my grandmother and my memory of going to work with her.
Mm-hmm.
We would get up before day, it was dark, and we would
Mm-hmm.
walk up to the corner store where the labor bus would come and pick the people up to take them to the fields.
Mm.
And when my grandmother walked up, everybody would stand back because she was recognized as one of the best workers in the
Mm-hmm.
community.
Wow.
I remember feeling pride that I was walking with my grandmother and everybody stood back. And when we
Mm,
got to the fields, we were picking strawberries.
mhm,
She was so fast that she would go way down the road and leave me, but she
mhm,
left me in the care of some Filipino workers.
mm,
So she could go ahead and make her baskets. They
mhm.
were slower and they helped me fill up my baskets. So this is a community of people who had
Mhm.
respect
Right.
for each other. I didn't
Mhm,
have shame. Yeah, we were out in the fields picking strawberries, but I wasn't ashamed. I was proud because my
mhm,
grandmother was one of the best workers in the community. And when she came on the scene, people stood aside to let her
mhm.
pass.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any shame.
Right.
I remember people trying to make me feel ashamed,
Mhm.
but it didn't work because I had a foundation.
Yeah. Wow. And that foundation is so important. One of the things I realized too, I have been and I am very intentional, even in terms of what I expose my son to. And the truth is, I am deeply concerned. I mean, he's 13 now, but I am deeply concerned about, what will happen, if he goes to
Mhm,
college and,
mhm.
where should he go to college? Because there's such a balance between the need to make sure your identity doesn't diminish and what you
Yeah.
achieve, right? and
Mhm,
so and so it's the first time I've thought about it in terms of because even though I went to Columbia, you graduate undergrad and grad, you went to these Ivy League, and then you start to realize that the importance of attending those Ivy Leagues were not so much in what you directly gained because it's given, but in what you've had to fight for because it wasn't
mhm.
there, you know? And
Yeah.
so that's my thinking now. Um, because in joining our recent church, we had the opportunity to celebrate watch night for the first time.
Mhm.
And understanding what that is and having him listen to these men and women talk about their experiences in their past, and it's so invaluable now. I think more than ever, we need more of that community, not less of it.
Well, I'm very grateful for the way that I was raised
Mhm.
to be proud of myself, but to also honor other people. I mentioned the
Mm,
Filipino men working in the fields. My
yeah.
grandmother lived next door to a Mexican family, and they owned a store,
Mhm.
and we called them mom and pop. And
Mhm.
I remember, the way they cooked and the tortillas. And I mean, there was a way in which our community valued humanity.
Mm,
So there was no, I'm good, so therefore you have to be bad.
yeah.
Our our heritage also includes that valuing of other human beings. That's how I
Mm,
was raised.
yeah.
So there was no
Mhm.
way that you could make me choose to put someone else down in order to elevate myself. So when
Mm,
we were activists at Stanford and we made our demands, the Black students' demands included what we felt needed to be offered or provided for Native Americans, for
mhm.
Latinos. So if you look at the 10 demands that the Black students at Stanford organized in 1968,
Mhm.
there were also calls for the benefits that other groups needed.
Absolutely.
That's just being human. That's just
Mhm.
being human.
Right. Wow. Oh my goodness. Um, I remember, when it comes to our way of knowing and thinking about things and valuing others, I remember a story you shared, and you don't have to say it if you don't want it, but that story you shared stuck with me because I have seen that movie 1,000 times. I think you probably know what I'm talking about. You could feel free to share that one or others in terms of lessons
Mhm.
learned, because I think part of the way I've approached my work, and I suspect you probably think along these lines too, because your work is one of the few that resonated with me, and part of it was also approaching this, I guess, in some ways, this fight from a constructivist approach, something we sometimes don't think about because it's very easy for us to view white people positively, and black people with a deficit perspective. But I felt like I really needed to, like, I would take, you know okay, so one of the things sometimes I get criticized for is not using enough of our work. Whereas, because my approach has
Mhm.
been, especially in the past, to take that same work that people have done and kind of turn it over and say, well, you could think of it this way too. Um, and so
Mhm.
that story you said stuck with me, and I think I have a suspect you know what I'm
Do
talking
you
about.
remember which film it was?
Yes, I do.
I use a lot of films. Which film was it?
It was Braveheart.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay. So, um, I learned about the European practice, which was
Hmm.
called the first night. I learned about that from Bernice Johnson Reagan, who was a
Hmm.
folklorist. She founded Sweet Honey in the Rock, but she was also very well informed about culture. And she told in a presentation, she told the story about how the European colonization process worked. That in the, I should say, the Middle Ages,
Hmm.
when one group was colonized, in this case by the British, their practice was to, on the night of the wedding, the woman would have to go and spend her first night with the colonizing lord. So in the film Braveheart with Mel Gibson, he's the
Hmm.
hero, there's a wedding scene.
Hmm.
And I asked my students, I said, "Have you seen the film Braveheart?" Because what I'm teaching
Hmm.
is how this worldview
Hmm.
limits your ability to interpret what you're actually seeing with your own eyes.
Yep.
If you don't have the framework conceptually, what
Hmm.
you're looking at, you can't interpret it. So the students say, "Oh, yeah, we've seen the film." That's good. Okay, so what happens in the wedding scene?
Hmm.
They don't even remember. Well, I said, "But you said you saw the film." So the wedding scene, there's a couple, they get married, and then all of a sudden the soldiers come, they bust up the wedding, and they take the bride, and
Hmm.
they're taking her up the hill so that
Hmm.
for the first night, she's gonna have sex with the colonizing lord, because
Hmm.
their philosophy is to breed out the indigenous people with their own blood.
Hmm.
So my students say, "Well, we don't remember that." You don't remember it because you don't have the knowledge to
Hmm.
interpret what the film is telling you. So
Yeah.
this is our introduction to how colonization works.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
see it in the film, but you also have to understand how it works on you.
Yeah.
So you don't have the historical knowledge to interpret what has happened in your own history. And I
Hmm.
say, there's no black people in this scene. It's all Europeans. But
Hmm.
it's the way that the Europeans have made a hierarchy over who's better and
Hmm.
whose genetics should prevail over others. And so it allows us to talk about the process of domination
Hmm.
and how your own thinking is a result of that domination. So I use a
Hmm.
lot of film
Wow.
to create a space for us to think about history in
Hmm.
a very concrete way that is not framed in the current black white binary.
Absolutely.
There's no
Um,
black people in the family. But now we can say, okay, so when oppression works, you've got to have an oppressor and you got the oppressed. And how does that process of domination actually work?
Mhm. Wow. It's amazing though. It's amazing how our worldview and our frames of reference, um, you know, leads us to hone in on the fact that this was this romantic scene of this person um running after and going and rescuing her, as opposed to she's really being taken off and raped by a king, right? We don't
Right.
really,
Mm-hmm.
our frame of reference, it makes me wonder, and I don't know how to what extent you've looked at that. um what else is passed down in our thinking, because that thinking prevails today, right? The way we put some people on a pedestal, to the extent that it
Mm-hmm.
influences our interpretations of their actions, right?
Mm-hmm.
We might diminish the bad actions until it
Mm-hmm.
has to get so bad. We diminish it
Mm-hmm.
so much that it becomes normalized.
Well, it's all about our identity and who we're prepared to identify with.
Mm,
So we're prepared to identify with a particular narrative. I mean, it's so deep, it
mm.
happens from a very young age. All the
Wow.
stories of princes and princesses, and
Yeah.
you know, you end up wanting to be somebody else totally without knowing your own story or knowing really the truth of that story that you've been given. So we have to sort of unfreeze these
Mm,
conceptualizations that keep us identifying with a system that is really dehumanizing everybody.
mm. It's amazing, but not everybody thinks it's being dehumanizing to them, right?
Because
Because
you aspire, you're aspiring to be the winner. You're aspiring to be the beautiful one. You're aspiring to be saved. I mean, all of those myths that don't allow you to truthfully engage with the world.
mm,
Another film that I reference with my students is Star Wars. So I'm
mm,
dating myself because the people I teach, they weren't children for Star Wars, right? But there's a scene in Star Wars where the evil character Darth Vader, he has this Death Star, right?
mhm,
And so he's able to use this weapon to demolish an entire planet.
mhm,
He shoots the Death Star and the whole planet disappears.
mhm,
And the narration says, and there was a collective sigh in the universe. In other words, the universe is mourning the loss of all those souls.
mm,
And I ask my students, where is our collective sigh for what is
mm.
happening in the universe to other people? The movies tell us a lot. They don't hide
They
anything,
do.
they have it right there
Mhm.
in your face. But if you don't have the knowledge to interpret it, it goes right over your head because you're focused on something else.
Right. It reminds me of the idea of, what does truth mean, right? What does truth mean when you don't have that frame of reference, right?
Mhm,
Like,
mhm. Well, what Black Studies has offered me, my education as a Black Studies student and scholar, is a
mhm,
lens to reinterpret our own history and experience. I remember learning that our gospel songs and our tradition of um, music, the
mhm,
lyrics, the poetic nature. It's our worldview, it's our epistemology. And I
mhm,
remember the interpretation when they sang, "When I get to heaven, gonna put on my shoes and walk all over God's heaven."
mhm,
What what they were saying is, we know that the story of heaven that you've been telling us is
mhm,
your story, but it is not the only way of understanding what heaven
mm,
is about. And when I get to heaven, I'm going to put on my shoes because you've deprived me of shoes. But when I get to heaven, I'm going to put on my shoes and walk all over God's heaven, not the
Yeah.
heaven that you've been describing. Now imagine, these are enslaved people
Mhm.
reinterpreting the narrative that they've been given and
Mhm.
singing that song in front of the oppressive masters because
Mhm.
they have an epistemology that is affirming of their
Mhm.
humanity. And so
Right.
when we learn that that's what our ancestors did, we can say, oh my goodness, we come from those people. Well, what
Mhm.
should we be doing today to fulfill the possibilities that they sacrificed for us to be here?
Hmm. Wow. And not only what should we be doing, but how do we get there? How do we get there when, I mean, you have over 80% of teachers are white, and even the teachers are black, we're often out of touch with, that knowledge. We're often, we didn't
Mm-hmm.
grow up in such a way. And so these patterns get carried down, these patterns get perpetuated by all of us, really, right? By everyone who might not be seeking to build that
Anybody
way.
is susceptible,
What?
right? It can get in anybody.
Yeah.
This anti-human worldview can get in anybody. But
Hmm.
when you're in community, when you have a connection to your grandmother or
Hmm.
anybody else that has taught you to be a human being, that is your opportunity to affirm a different way of being. It doesn't have to be this way. We're on our journey to make a difference. I may not get there with you, but I'm on my
Hmm.
way, and I believe that we have some possibilities because of who we are and the price that's been paid for us to be here. So in
Yeah.
that sense, you just keep going.
Yeah. Wow. One of the challenges, one of the directions I've taken, even with my work, is I'm in the implementation phase where I recently implemented with Black homeschoolers. Um, just to
Hmm.
really, and then I have to say, and hopefully, we're working on a publication and hopefully it should be out soon. But I bring that up because I think even when I've been at talks recently and I kind of spoke up on some things that I observed. Um, because the view of we have of black parents, um, the way we diminish black parents, I'm still trying to figure out some of that. You know, and and I sound naive saying this, but just because I ask myself questions, like where did that come from? Like what is that, right? Why do
Hmm.
we not only diminish black parents, because it's so pervasive to the fact that even in my own experience as a teacher and in observing other districts or teachers engage, I still see how districts position themselves in such a way that even a teacher, even if you want to, you can't really connect because it's just I don't know. It's that pattern and experience that overshadows just how we view black parents and interact. I don't know. Can you shed some light on that in terms of, what's been your experience and and even in your work and ways of knowing?
Well, we learn these ways of thinking about other people,
Mhm.
and there's just a human tendency. You don't want to see yourself as the problem, so the
Mhm.
problem must be somewhere else.
Right.
um in a school setting where there's a district level or an individual school, you have to look, well, where are the incentives? What's the norm here? How does this institution or this cultural setting reward certain behaviors and not others?
Mhm.
So you have to kind of unlearn some things in order to replace those ways of relating to people with something more communal, more positive. But where do you get an opportunity to learn that as a professional? Has it been part of your professional education? Maybe not. So
Yeah.
then, there's opportunities to hear another interpretation, but can you actually hear it if you're being rewarded for doing other things? And
Mm.
anybody who's going against the grain, if you're going against the grain, you're going to get a pushback. Well, we don't do that
Mhm.
here, or what's wrong with you? Must So you have to be strong enough to believe that there's another way, even while you're trying to learn how to implement that other way.
Hmm.
But what I always believe is that it's much more likely that you can be successful when you're not alone, when you have someone else that you're working with in collaboration with. That
Mm.
collaboration could be with a parent, it could be
Yeah.
with another teacher, but the idea that you're not alone is what will sustain you to go through the process of
Mm.
making things different, because it's not automatic. And you make some mistakes. It's not just a straightforward thing, but you have to discover a
Mm.
way to make the change that you're looking for. When my children were in elementary school, I was organizing parents. Parents come together, something's wrong. Let's see what can we do to make things
Mhm.
different. So
Mhm.
our parent group, we were meeting, and some of the parents said, "Well, let's paint the teacher's lunchroom and put new curtains in there, and maybe they will treat our children better."
Mm.
Well, I knew that wasn't going to make the difference. But
Mhm.
what I did, I went across town, had a friend on the wealthy side of town, and I asked her to give me her children's homework. So I came back to the parent meeting and I said, I want to show you guys the homework that the kids are getting over there.
Mhm.
So when the parents saw the homework, they said, forget about the painting the lunchroom and those curtains. We're going to deal with this curriculum. But you see, this is learning. This is
Mhm.
sharing. But I
Yeah.
didn't come in and say, you guys are all wrong. You don't know what's happening. You have to be a part of a process of enlarging people's understanding. And so the parents said, "Oh no, we're going to deal with this curriculum," and
Mhm.
we did
Mhm.
as a collective group. But that was a decision that came from more information.
Right. Wow. I had a conversation with a teacher. She had both black and white students in her class. And it's funny, I'm still trying to convince her to, hopefully we will do a podcast. But we had this conversation where she observed, the books on the shelves, and then the white kids would run and read these books and grab them, and the black kids weren't. And so I was putting myself in these black kids' shoe, and I'm thinking, especially now, especially with what's happening, I won't want to touch those books. I wouldn't want
Mhm.
I would feel like it was an assault on my psyche, you know? And even it's interesting because I have that conversation with my husband about reading that and reading that. And then sometimes my mom brings these books, and I said, no, that's not a book I can have him read. I know you gave me to me when I was growing up, but I don't want him, his sense of self to be diminished. Like mine was
Mhm.
reading that book as if it's the norm,
Mhm.
right? Um,
Mhm.
And so, we talk about this because, I realized after so many years, yeah, I was able to find some books for my son. He likes his adventures, and he found, Tristan Strong and all these things. But then, I understand why he's not he can't pick up a book and read other than, he reads Harry Potter, and he's read those since he was probably 5 or so, but can't really grab these books to read. Um, I'm not worried about it, to be honest, because he's learning literacy in other ways. He's learning literacy from
Mhm.
reading other things, and he's doing fine and well with it. in his interpretation, but the way we define literacy and the things that we actually think is okay, um, especially for
Mhm.
Black kids, um, we just can't do it without parents. I don't think we realize that we
You are
can't.
so right. We need a partnership with parents. But is that on the curriculum for teacher preparation, how to partner with parents? Where do people get the opportunity to do that, you know?
Hmm.
So the parents have had experiences that make them look at the educators with suspicion,
Hmm.
and the educators have had experiences that make them look at the parents with suspicion. And
Hmm.
meanwhile, the people running the show are, they're getting away scot-free because we're distracted
Hmm.
by the ways that they've divided us.
Wow. I think I see someone wrote something in a chat. Um, Before I go to the chat, with any questions, I'll I said it's I'm live here, not just on YouTube.
Mhm.
Let's see. Oh, okay. I thought someone wrote something in the chat. It comes up. Interesting. Okay. Sorry, my thing is in
I
the way.
see, Jerome Morris enjoying this interview with Dr. King. Hey, Jerome.
I'm on the Oh, I see. It's bringing up what was on YouTube. Okay, I thought somebody else wrote something else in chat. Okay. Um oh my goodness. I I'm curious as to whether or not I guess I was thinking of this more and more, realizing that sometimes we approach this uniquely. Have you ever thought of making your syllabi available just out of curiosity, or have you because I've been thinking about that more and
Oh,
more.
yeah, some people
Uh,
have. I've shared my syllabus, but the
mhm.
syllabus is just a document. It is
Yeah.
not the pedagogy.
Mm-mm.
I mean, you can't just take the syllabus and think that it's magically gonna produce certain
Right.
outcomes, and I'm very, you know, interactive and reciprocal, in the way that I teach, so what my students bring, I tell them that who you are and what your experiences are, that's as important for our experience as what I've put together on the syllabus.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I have a metaphor that I use. I tell the students, imagine there's an empty chair
Mm-hmm.
in the class, and you're sitting in that empty chair. Everything that's inside of you is a part of what this class is about. So
Mm-hmm.
that means you have an opportunity to delve into your own lived experience, your own views, your own understanding, and bring that
Mm-hmm.
for the rest of us to benefit from. And I tell them that we're using a jigsaw method. It's a
Mm-hmm.
jigsaw method for elementary schools, but everybody has a piece of the puzzle. So we want to know what
I
your
love
piece
that.
of the puzzle is that you're bringing for us all to make this picture work.
Mm.
So that's not on the syllabus. But what is on the syllabus are readings and media and a kind of, it's not even a chronology, but it's a mix
Mm-hmm.
that allows for knowledge to grow. Because I get students from different disciplines, different departments, and we have to kind of create a common framework for us all to relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Wow.
start every class with a movie.
Oh wow. You started with a movie for the purpose of reflecting on themselves. Go ahead. I don't want to.
uh, to create a common experience that we can
Mm.
return to.
Okay.
So
Wow.
when I teach the social foundations of education, I start with a film called Black 47.
Mm.
And right away, some people are assuming that this is about Black people. but it's not about Black people. It's
Yeah.
about 1847 when the
Yeah.
British colonized the Irish and
Mhm.
how the Irish were starving
Mhm.
and really, really oppressed. And so again, now we're going back into another time frame, another cultural context. There's no Black people anywhere in this film, but
Mhm.
you can see how
Mhm.
oppression works. And these Irish people who were so brutalized by the process of colonization, they end up immigrating to the United States in the 1800s. And when they
Mm.
come to the United States
Mm.
as brutalized Irish, they become white and they end up brutalizing Black people.
Mhm.
So my students say, well, how could they
Mhm.
do that? How could they do that? Let's think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
sociology of education. And when I teach sociology of inner city children, the film we start with is a film about the prison system, and it's called Writ Writer.
Mhm.
It's about a Mexican
Mhm.
American guy who became a jailhouse lawyer and how his case against the brutalization of the prison system helped to reform prisons in the United States. But it's a story of what happens inside the prison and the warden, who is so terrible and just treating the prisoners in such an inhumane way, has a PhD in religion.
Oh.
So that means, whoa, you mean you mean you can get to the highest level of education and be a monster? How about that?
I love that. It's funny you said that because I do something similar. Starting from that place in the beginning, I do two things with my courses. One of them, especially with the methods, is I have students read the book um, by Sandra McGuire on teaching students how to learn
Mm.
and teaching yourself how to learn, because one of the things we talk about is how you view yourself as a learner will determine how you teach, and how you view
Oh,
others as a
yes. Yeah.
learner.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I also start,
Very
especially,
nice.
yeah, especially in the educational psychology course, I start with I share Brené Brown's talks on shame.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it's an important part of our experience, and so much in the society, the larger society,
Mhm.
um, prepares you to feel shamed, ashamed for your body, ashamed for who you are as an ethnic person. And so that means we have to deconstruct the way the society works.
Right. And oftentimes, whatever a background is, whether we come from a background where we've been brutalized, right, and turned to brutalizing others, or we've been, whatever it is, whatever shame we've experienced, often leads us in some way to inflict that, right, on someone else,
Mhm.
in the way we approach, whether we've been shamed by our parents, or or we've had domineering parents, or never been given a voice, we end
Mhm.
up sometimes without realizing and being aware of it. um
Yeah, that happens too. Mhm.
mhm,
So I think when
wow.
you engage with other cultures, we study Native American experiences, we see
Mhm,
that, what we think is just human behavior is specific to a particular culture. It's not,
mhm,
they don't do it over there. Then
yeah.
we say, oh, I wonder that's about. So again, opening up your knowledge, the base
Mhm,
of knowledge that you have, makes it possible for you to ask different questions and
yeah.
see things differently.
Wow. Wow. Oh my goodness. I know that I'm looking to see my other book. I know that you and I can keep going on and on talking here. This is amazing conversation. Um, what do you think? Especially when I think about um, what are some takeaways you want to leave our audience with, especially when you think about. Go ahead.
Takeaways? What am I thinking about? What?
Well, what do we need as Black people? I just remember this other question I really wanted to ask you. What do we need as Black people? You
Mhm.
think, and when it comes to just in general or in our education, just what comes to mind?
Well, I
Mhm.
think what we need has to be contextualized
Mm.
in terms of where we are
Mhm.
in our social circumstance.
Mhm.
So, if you are a well-to-do, upper middle class, highly paid person, and you're raising your children, what do your children need? They have quote unquote everything,
Mhm.
but do they really?
Mhm.
How do you prepare children who are in the quote unquote middle class or upper middle class to be better human beings when they
Mhm.
have quote unquote everything? So, what
Mhm.
they need may be very different from what a child growing up in a very impoverished
Mhm.
circumstance doesn't have food every day, is, really challenged with material things, but that
Mhm.
child may actually have more human connection than the
Mhm.
child in the well-off circumstance. So I think we
Mhm.
have to analyze. We have
Mhm.
to analyze what our circumstance is
Mhm.
and see where are we trying to go as
Wow.
people. What is it that who are the people we're trying to produce for the world?
Mhm.
So
Wow.
I always start with some
Mhm.
kind of analysis, not just
Mm.
a formula that applies to everybody.
Wow. That's so true. Because even we, you see how we can put each other in a box as well,
Oh, sure,
as
sure,
we've been put in
sure.
boxes.
Mhm. But I
Wow.
think we need more humility, we need more patience,
Mhm.
and we need belief. We need belief in who we are in terms of who our ancestors were, what they did to get us here,
Mhm.
and what our responsibility is. So if we begin to think that way, that allows us to have a lens to look at our circumstance.
Mhm. And even realizing there's not necessarily one way to get there. Um,
Mhm, exactly.
and
I
analyzing
really
that.
believe.
What's that?
Mhm, mhm. I said I really believe that. We don't all have to do the same thing. I've said
Mhm.
that many times.
Right.
Mhm.
It's very fascinating. I realize there are questions I realize I could easily go down another road here, especially since especially if we were involved some of the things that I'm observing, with in Africa. Well, I guess we could table that. It's fascinating because I think there's such a temptation to not only think the grass is greener, but also to um not just mourn something we didn't have because we didn't have that connection and that's lost, um but also to not analyze really what's going on and what it would mean for us, especially since we've also um we have a different context now, right? And in the
Mhm,
way we fight,
mhm.
you know
Well, there's so many distractions,
Mm.
intentional distractions. I mean, the media, the materialism, the way in which
Mhm.
people are pitted against each other, the
Yeah.
idea that if I got it, you can't have it. I mean, these
Mhm.
are elements of this culture.
Mhm.
And when you travel or you have connections with other communities and you are able to understand, oh, it doesn't have to be this way. This is something that's been passed down to us, but maybe it's not something we need to keep. But
Mhm.
that again comes from a broader exposure.
Mhm.
And how can our young people get exposure? Well, It's not through the television because the television and movies are giving you a very narrow
Mhm.
representation of humanity. But we have to seek out those other opportunities for our children to learn,
Right.
to really engage. And I think specifically looking at family history, um, delving into the
Mhm.
story of your own family, learning more about your ancestors. This is a process that you can engage young people with. They may not be interested immediately,
Mhm.
but if you stick with it, you can find out what matters to them, and
Mhm.
you can follow up from there.
Wow. I have you I mean, I'm curious, have you given any thought to AI and the role in your work?
I've
Have
had
you
lots of conversations with people about AI,
Mhm.
and, there's people who say, "Oh, it's dangerous, it's gonna eliminate our jobs, and it's racist," which I think is probably there's truth in that. But
Mhm.
then there's also the possibility that we can, as we do with many things, we can bend it and make it work on our behalf if we have
Mhm.
the knowledge not to just be consumers,
Mhm.
but to be producers. So
Yeah.
this isn't anything different than it's always been.
Mm-mm.
We're faced with making things more human all the
Right.
time.
Wow. The needs are still the same, right? The need to teach people how to think and to think critically,
Mhm. Yes, yes,
you know?
yes, yes.
The need to teach AI even how to think. Um,
Mm. Well, we
and
don't have a lot of time, we better hurry up.
I think the motives remain the same. That we can say, right? The underlying motives remain the same, which will be
Mhm.
fascinating to watch how that plays out.
Well, we're at a point in the society where what was hidden is now more obvious
Mhm.
in the open.
Right.
The the fact that our labor is not needed as it was in the past, what are they gonna do with us, you know?
Mhm.
Um So
Yeah.
we are now really almost in open warfare against our survival as a people, as
Mhm.
African people, as Latino people. I
Mhm.
mean, so the animosity, the hatred, the violence, it's all coming out in the open.
Yeah.
But there are those who think that we don't have any answer or we don't have any way of responding, but that's not true. We've always had a way of responding, and we just have to remember that.
Right. Because we've had to think deeply, you know?
Mhm,
We
mhm.
don't necessarily have the luxury of simply reacting.
Right. One
Um
of the books I used in my classes is, I used The African by Harold Kurlander,
Mhm.
which was the story that, Alex Haley used to develop, the whole, um, narrative of roots.
Mhm.
So, the character in The African is a young boy who is captured and enslaved at the age of 12, but he's gone through his community's rites of passage.
Mhm.
So he has a sense of who he is and he has a spiritual center. So he
Mhm.
goes through many experiences. He's enslaved, brutalized. He has a maroon experience and he ends up on a Georgia plantation.
Mm.
And he's hearing about this place called Liberty Island. And he decides if he can just escape and get to Liberty Island, that will be the answer to his problem. So on the plantation, he sees some Africans who were born on the plantation and they've lost all their African sense of who they are. But he is able to bring some ritual and some cultural patterns to
Mm.
that context. But he escapes and he's
Mhm.
on his way to Liberty Island. And so he meets some people coming from the other direction.
Mhm.
And he asks them, "Well, where are you going?" said, "We trying to get away from Liberty Island." He said, "Well, that's where I'm trying to go." They said, "No, you don't wanna go there." But he's convinced if he can get to Liberty Island, that's where freedom is.
Mhm.
So he gets there, and of course, the Africans have reproduced the plantation worldview, and they're oppressing each other, and so now
Mm.
what is gonna be the solution? And
Mm.
he's able to return to the practices of his community, that communal, self-determination, and we are
Mm.
gonna survive together, and that's how the story ends.
Mhm.
And then I tell my students, "A white man wrote this book." They said, "Oh, Dr. King, that's not possible. How could a white man tell this story?" Yes, there's a white man wrote it.
Mhm.
But he's a folklorist.
Mhm.
So his whole understanding is informed by culture from the inside out, and that's
Mm.
how he's able to tell our story so
Wow.
authentically and truthfully.
Right.
So there are many lessons in that. And so we don't wanna be on Liberty Island.
Yeah.
We
You know,
we
it's
wanna
it's
know our heritage knowledge.
right. Wow. Oh my
So that's
gosh.
one of the tools I use to get us thinking about analyzing the reality that we're in and what resources do we have to respond.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Dr. King, what an amazing conversation. I
Thank you for the invitation.
thank you. Thanks
Mhm.
for giving me the honors here. I had shared this
Oh, you're
and
so welcome.
I had shared this with some of my peers and peers that you're probably familiar with. And so
Mhm.
just to let you know, they were congratulating me. Even they were
Oh,
amazed and that you took the time, and I really, really appreciate it. It's been an honor, and I am to be congratulated that I had the opportunity to sit down and have this conversation with you. And I hope it's not our
well,
last.
thank you for the invitation. Right, and I'm so happy to learn about your grandmother and her
Oh.
curls.
I do. I share her sometimes even on my talks. So thank you.
Mhm.
So
Okay, so have a wonderful day.
thank you. And I want to say if you enjoy this talk with Dr. King, please like it and subscribe and so you can also be alerted when the podcast version is out. And thank you for joining today.